In tonight's stories, I'll be sharing with you some terrifying park ranger stories submitted to me. All throughout North America, park rangers are experiencing bizarre, unexplainable phenomena. Some deem it as supernatural, others deem it as unexplainable. This first story I'm going to be sharing with you highlights just some of the mystery and phenomena happening. This story was submitted to me by a gentleman who referred to himself as Jason. Jason went on to tell me in his email that this all occurred between 2005 to 2009 in a national park that he wished and requested to remain anonymous, but informed me that it's okay to tell you that it is in the northern section of the United States. What's interesting about Jason's story is he brings forth information about a search and rescue mission where they found a body that was posed about 40 feet up in a pine tree with wounds that were physically impossible for a bear to make, but it was written down as a bear kill. After all, bears attacking and killing humans isn't necessarily new, but to write off these bizarre events as a simple bear kill, something just isn't adding up. Jason explained that for a while now, months before this even happened, him and his colleagues were hearing and experiencing strange things all around the park, from mysterious phenomena, mysterious black apparitions appearing out of the corner of their eyes, and strange lights and sounds appearing all over the park at all times of the day. But when you're on a job like that, you really just don't talk about it, or it'll come up in casual conversation with each other, but it's not something you're going to outright report to your superiors, and for good reason. And so for a while now, visitors across the park had been complaining about strange, disturbing noises, from humans screaming and yelling to strange, unexplainable animal sounds, all coming from this backcountry area of forest in the park. But when investigated by rangers and staff personnel at the park, there was no trace of anything, from tracks to any evidence of anybody being back there. It's as if these sounds simply manifested on their own and vanished when anybody would draw an ounce of curiosity to inspect what was happening. Apparently, some of Jason's closest colleagues and people whom he worked with had some strange experiences while in this small section of backwoods, although they refused to talk about it, and every time it was brought up, just casually, they seemed to go pale and act scared, like they knew something but were too afraid to talk about it. Now, this puzzled Jason, and keep in mind that these particular events I'm explaining now happened before the search and rescue, where the body was found posed up in a tree and assumed to be, or at least written down as, a bear kill. Other reports had come in that Jason dealt with personally, that in these backcountry sites, food and supplies were being taken, but it was easily written off because animals can thieve food and supplies, and the human noises or sounds, or what was perceived to be that, could easily be written off and explained as foxes and mountain lions at nighttime. And then Jason goes on to tell of a more harrowing experience, and this was, of course, after the search and rescue find of the body. There were some personnel that were growing concerned because they believed they had a bear conditioned to human food on their hands, and it would only prove to be dangerous. However, upon venturing back further, they found what appeared to be a den of some kind, and not that of a bear. One of Jason's closest colleagues also reports strange sounds like a mechanical humming in the woods right near where this den was. And it was around this same den where he spotted strange tracks that he could not quite identify. In fact, they looked more akin to that of a goat track, but did not resemble any animal that he is familiar with. And so for the following few days to come, they would spend time hiking throughout this small valley, where this bizarre, pervasive odor of death would follow suit. And in this same very evening, where they were camping out in this small valley, they experienced a series of strange events that would occur over the course of the night. What one of them had reported as strange whispers and hushed tones right near the tent, along with some strange gurgling noises like somebody gargling on blood. And as Jason recalls, one of these park rangers ventured out beyond the reaches of his tent and the safety of the torchlight, armed with the rifle, to investigate the source of these strange noises. Now, there was some moonlight giving brief illumination to the area around him, and as he could see off into the woodline, shining and scanning with his flashlight, he didn't capture anything. But there were a few moments where he swore that he could see a very tall, skinny silhouette watching him from the tree line. A silhouette that unmistakably was not a bear in any way, shape, or form. What's also strange is the ever-pursuing odor of death in this whole entire valley. And these rangers who had made note of it noticed that any time these strange occurrences happened, whether it be sights or smells or phenomena, this odor of death would increase tenfold. And the way they explained it to Jason, who relayed it to me, was imagine standing next to a cow carcass that had been dead for 3 to 4 days, baking in the hot sun. Enough to make you gag, but there's no visible source for this odor to be coming from, especially not as strong and as potent as this was. And so the following day, they all returned to the main portion of the camp with no signs or no evidence to further validate what the source of the noises were. This only complicated things more as everybody was so perplexed at their findings. And while everybody was creeped out, nobody was about to go ahead and point fingers at the boogeyman. You want to talk about keeping your credibility? That's not something you even hint at in a professional setting. What's also very interesting is that the same day in October, 2 hikers would end up missing around the same area where they heard those noises the previous night in that same valley. And Jason, who is now involved in a search party to try and find these 2 missing hikers, experienced a series of unexplainable events, sounds, and phenomena himself that would further validate the experiences of his 2 fellow colleagues just days before. While the 2 missing hikers were never found and are still considered several of the missing persons cases today, the experiences that Jason recalled were completely bone-chilling. And this is beside the body that was found about 40 feet propped up into a tree. It was apparently so that during one of these evenings, Jason had been chased away from his vehicle by what he described as a large, tall, bipedal figure that before breaking out of the woodline chasing after him, it was making this strange gurgling sound, the equivalent to somebody just having their throat cut or gurgling on blood. Jason claimed that this same entity was responsible for the putrid odor, but had no claims or evidence to support that this was the same entity or supernatural phenomena that had been plaguing his fellow colleagues just a few days prior when they were in the valley. He firmly stands that this was not some hallucination or that he was on drugs, but that he was thoroughly terrified by what he had experienced that night. And due to the nature of the case, he could not report it to his supervisor or his warden, so he just did what everybody else does. Talk about it amongst your colleagues who are willing to listen, and keep quiet when you're supposed to. And during the daytime, while on search for these 2 missing individuals, he had reported being stalked or followed by something he could not see. Or to put it simply, he described it as an unforeseen force following him. Jason is also a man who proudly identifies as atheist and does not believe in the paranormal or anything that goes bump in the night, so to speak, but he can't refute what happened to him and has no explanation for these bizarre set of events. And perhaps one of the most frightening things to happen, beside the person being found 40 feet up in a tree and the other bizarre occurrences that had happened, were finding human remains out in the same valley in which his 2 colleagues went and had their own strange experiences. Once he had discovered these human remains, he didn't really tell me via email all the details, but that he followed the appropriate protocol to have the body properly taken care of, but they could not identify who the body belonged to. And there had been no reports in the general time frame of anybody gone missing, so the hiker was simply a Jane Doe. But the problem was not so much the body and the missing person who it belonged to, it was more so the condition in which the body was found in. Now, he shared with me some pretty disturbing descriptions of how the body was found, and I'm not going to share every little detail, but I will say that the body was badly mangled in a way that did not classify as a wolf, or a bear, or a mountain lion, and that the kill was hardly eaten on, but primarily just disfigured, as if something had used this person as its plaything and mangled this corpse, and that there were even bizarre bite marks taken out of it that did not fit a canine of any kind, or a bear, or a mountain lion, coyote, fox, you name it. Anything falling under the carnivorous or omnivore category, nothing matched up. Even the teeth marks, nobody could really figure out. So this was yet another case written down as simply a bear kill. And even Jason, who had found the body originally, tried his best to rationalize the find as somebody had a very misfortunate run-in with a bear, but with how badly mangled this person was, which bears do, it did not line up with the way a bear kills. I'll let you guys be the judge on this and let you guys speculate. Could this have been something supernatural? Does this have any connection at all to the thing chasing Jason at night, or the experience the other 2 park rangers had in the valley? Or is this simply just a misidentification of an unfortunate individual being slaughtered by a bear? And those are just about all the details Jason had left me. So I'd love to hear what you guys think in the comments below for this particular story of what you think happened. Is it real? Was there something truly supernatural? Or is there simply a way to rationally explain it all with critical thinking and real life evidence? Now, this next story comes from a man who claims he's extensively worked as a ranger in the state of Arizona for well over 20 years now. and has spent countless hours on the trails in the backcountry, along the rivers, and has seen many, many things, both good and bad. He wishes to remain anonymous for the sake of the details in the story. Like many other things, he's also not a big believer in Bigfoot or any other sort of paranormal happening, but is open to the possibility that maybe some sort of unidentified humanoid does exist, but is not exactly fact. Currently, he informed me that he is living near Tucson, but spent the majority of his life growing up near Flagstaff, and that he is half native and has been living here for roughly around 200 years now, where his family resides. While he isn't exactly quick to point fingers at what he saw as a ghost or some sort of paranormal entity, he does describe it as a large black wolf that does have unknown origins. He quickly brushed the notion off that it was anything like a dogman or a werewolf, but just explained that this was a overly large black wolf, but still had very mysterious circumstances surrounding it. And I'll explain this to you. He went into detail about the events of this night and explained that he was on a night hike on the Mogollon Rim trail system. He went on to tell me that the trail system is very extensive, covering thousands of acres, and that in the surrounding area and vicinity, there are literally hundreds of miles worth of trails all throughout the wilderness, stretching from north to south. And the terrain varies from dense pine forest to scrub brush desert terrain. So he was out there night hiking at around 11 p.m. or a little bit after, and then it had rained earlier in that day. This was by far his favorite time to hike because of the non-existent traffic on these foothills. There were portions that were muddy, but it was primarily clear and dry. There was some slight overcast overhead, but nothing too much. What he said was really great about this night is that the portions where the sky opened up and the bright moon shone, it offered him a lot of illumination in the dark night, so he can kind of make out where he was going without the need of a high-powered LED flashlight. He claims that hiking around as a kid in the night has made his senses more acute to what his surroundings are, which I don't know if that's true or false, because personally, I've never spent a lot of time outside at night, so I couldn't tell you if that really does heighten your senses over a period of time. And his story continues that as he's hiking into these thick woods all by himself, not seeing another soul, that somewhere off into the distance, behind these thick bushy trees, just off the trail by maybe no more than 50 yards, give or take, he got the distinct impression that he was being watched. And immediately, he tells me his primal instincts fired up, and he immediately knew that he was being stalked by a large predator. He imagined that at first it was possibly a mountain lion, but wasn't quite sure, but just wanted to be prepared anyway. And as he stopped and began intently listening to the noise coming towards him, he realized that the night around him had gone completely silent. Part of him deeply wished it was just a deer moving around so he can have a reasonable explanation to what the noise was. But as he began intently listening more and more, he could hear some deep movement inside the thicket just beyond. And as he hears this thing moving towards him, but off to the side, he can hear that whatever it was wasn't just a case of a mountain lion, because mountain lions tend to stay quiet. This sounded humongous, like the size of a large elk or a moose, where he reiterated to me that you could hear the bulk and weight of it as it took steps. And the closer it got, as he's sitting there staying as quiet as possible, he could hear it take these deep inhales, meaning that whatever animal this belonged to had a massive set of lungs. This went on for what felt like nearly 10 minutes, until whatever it was came close to him and then moved further away deeper into the woods. He even went on to say that several times up to this point in the forest, he swore he saw the silhouette of what appeared to be a very large black wolf, and he could not shake the impression that he believed it was a dire wolf, judging by the size, and that this possibly could have been some sort of large wolf, a lone wolf, following and stalking him. And then he makes the connection that if what was there in the thicket following him and the things he saw earlier in the evening, if they are indeed the same animal, then this wolf is far larger than any wolf he's ever seen in his life. He went on to tell me in a separate email during our correspondence how he had time in Maine and Michigan and other states up north, to where he actually got to experience that native wildlife up close and personal, so he knew what to expect. But as he went on to describe the breathing that this thing made, and I say thing because nothing fit in a traditional box of a wolf. Like I said, the size and the fact that it was following him the way it was but he said these deep inhales did not sound like a dog panting or a animal panting like you would expect, but sounded more like a large man taking a deep inhale. Now, he didn't make any connection of it being raspy or guttural, nothing like that. Just made the connection that it sounded more human than it did animal. And he even had trouble distinguishing when he was hearing it in the thicket. Could it be on 2 legs or could it be on 4? I mean, it is very possible there's an explanation and that he was actually dealing with 2 separate things, but he reiterated to me in the follow-up email that he simply has just too much time logged in the outdoors for this to be a simple misidentification, or the fact that he was spooked and it distorted his perception of reality going on around him. He's thought long and hard about the same night and has replayed the events over and over again in his head and trying to just put together coherently something that makes sense that he could digest, but none of it just really made that much sense. So after whatever this was moved away further in the thicket, he decided it was best to turn around and head back home. Now, after making it back home safely, and the following day in the morning, he ventured back out the same direction, and he tells me he found these massive canine prints in the mud, in several different spots, mind you, and explained to me that they look bipedal. What I personally find very interesting about his whole account is, while he doesn't buy into the idea of a Bigfoot and looks at it more logically, he does tell me that he fears that whatever was following him could be of a more sinister nature, a skinwalker, or some sort of evil witch or shapeshifter, and went on to tell me that his family on his mother's side has dabbled into the occult for several generations, and growing up has always had this dark energy following him around, watching him, intervening in parts of his life in negative ways, and believes that that energy was responsible for injuring his leg about 6 years back. But that's a story for another day, he tells me. But his father and him do stay on the clean side of things and deter away from anything of the dark past the family has. So then we have to look at his account critically. Was there really something stalking him that night? Or could this merely have been a case of shadows playing tricks on him and a mountain lion stalking him, and maybe he just thought he heard the heavy sounds he did in the breathing? Even though he's pretty adamant about what he experienced, it's always possible for a misidentification or auditory hallucinations to occur, especially at nighttime when you are in sensory deprivation scenarios. Then if we look at other pieces like the sound going quiet, which would indicate a large predator in the area, among the few other things he described, it very well could mean that he had something after him, but what? I'm not too sure myself. I'll leave that up for you guys, my viewers, to decide that. He did leave me with one last note, in that several of his friends in various tribes throughout Arizona and the Southwest all describe strange supernatural beings, usually all with a sinister intent, lurking throughout Arizona's vast wilderness. And I've always wanted to ask, what's the reasoning for this? He also knows friends and colleagues personally who have experienced things similar to what he has at dusk and nighttime specifically, in and of the surrounding areas. But especially, he says, Oak Creek Canyon. This next one comes from a ranger located in Tennessee and has had several encounters with something they can't explain. And for the sake of the email in which we corresponded, they just asked that they be referred to as John. And specifically, they've worked at the Obed Wild Scenic River. And to give a little more background into who he is in the area, it's pretty heavily wooded in north central Tennessee, just north of the Cumberland Plateau. So John described himself as a lifelong outdoorsman, having never really been afraid of anything in nature. So when this happened, it really shook him up. His sighting or experience dates back to July 1st, 2017, while working on the Obed River area. He was doing some sort of public event there where he decided to leave early. Now, as soon as he got into his truck, which was his Ford F-150, and drove down one of the old fire roads, John claims that after about 10 minutes of driving on this road, which is mostly just dirt and rough gravel, something caught his attention in the rearview mirror. It was something he was not used to seeing because what he saw was eye shine. Now, eye shine generally happens due to a reflection in the eyes, mostly from animals when you shine a bright pair of light into them. But these were beyond his tailgate lights. These were off in the distance, and they appeared to be like 2 orbs emitting enough light that it caught his attention, pulling him away, distracting him from driving, looking in the rearview mirror, seeing something coming towards his vehicle from the back. Whatever it was appeared to be large and yellow and quickly approaching his vehicle. John wasn't really afraid in that moment, but just more curious, and so he slowly is looking in his rearview mirror, trying to figure out what he's looking at, and begins to come to a complete stop in his truck when he sees this thing coming out of the underbrush and what he described its movements were like that of a giant white spider, but claims that what he saw was distinctly humanoid, that it had pale white flesh and appeared to be naked, but the way it was crawling down on the ground and moving around just reminded him of an arachnid. And as it made its way out of the underbrush towards his truck, it actually was able to erect itself fully up, and John saw it more than he ever wanted to. He may note that it had a very abnormally large head and large hands. He says it was easily over 6 feet tall and had this very thin layer of hair covering its body, but not like fur, but more like body hair is what he described it, but just very thin and very light. And in that very second, John informs me that his survival instincts kicked in on full blast. He immediately, without thinking, pulls out his firearm, gets out of the truck, and points it directly at this thing's face, which, by the way, he described it as horribly disfigured and disgusting looking, and it immediately froze in its tracks. John got the impression immediately from its reaction that this thing somehow knew what a gun was, because it looked at him and looked down at his gun, and then back up at him, and slowly got back down on all fours into that weird crouched position that he saw it come out of the underbrush, and it quickly scurried back the way it came. John's claim is that it never acted malicious, but more so curious, and that he almost wonders if it didn't even realize that he and his truck was there, that it was merely just traveling through the area and happened to come upon him and his truck at the same time. Within seconds after this thing disappearing off into the dark, John describes this heavy, intense wave of nausea that would overcome him in these horrific head rushes, and John would just begin retching all over the ground. He has never had something like that happen before. From what he tells me, he doesn't take any medication, doesn't do chewing tobacco, doesn't smoke, doesn't do any drinking or drugs. So for this to happen out of the blue like this, and coincidentally happen right after this experience, is very strange. While he wasn't completely terrified in the moment, it did shake him up from what happened, and he was disturbed by this account. He also made note to me that within the next 4 days afterwards, he would have these horrible bouts of migraines that would come and go that were the most excruciating thing he has ever experienced in his life. It's like his head had been beaten by a brick, and the pain was so excruciating, there'd be times he would just have to curl up in a ball and roll, and then they would just suddenly go away as quickly as they would come on. And right around day 4, they had just completely ceased. John speculates that it was possibly, perhaps radioactivity, something. He even further speculates that it was potentially a mutant. One of his close friends, who's been hunting near this same area since 2011, had told him as well, after sharing his account with his friend, seeing some strange things lurking around this scenic area. In one event specifically, at Laurel Falls, late at night, while deer hunting several years back, John's friend claims to have seen a creature that was very similar, all white, very lanky, actually almost to the T what he described, but just completely upright. And that John's friend actually witnessed it taking down a full-grown deer, completely ignoring him when he was only a few yards away, watching the whole thing in front of him. But when John decided to open up to his best friend and share his own account with what had happened, his friend decided that, well, at least there's some validation here, and shared his own personal experience. So with all the strange things going on in today's world and all the bizarre phenomena and events going on in the woods, what do you guys think? Are there ways to explain away everything I've shared with you in today's episode? Or is this all just merely fabricated? Are these truly disturbing accounts? Or are these truly the workings of something not of this world going on in our national parks and to people just like me and you? I'll let you guys be the judge of that one. If you guys enjoyed this episode, be sure to go ahead and slap that like button, leave a comment down below, and if you're new to the channel, be sure to go ahead and hit that big old red subscribe button and keep your notifications turned on, so that way YouTube will let you know every time I release a great new video. As always, guys, I love y'all, keep an open mind, and I'll see you all in the very next video.